It is Wednesday, April the 3rd, 2019. You are listening to the EdTech Situation Room, episode 129, and I guess I should say happening now. Man, it's been a while, and I just feel like kind of a bumbling fool trying to learn the new ways of the YouTube Creator Studio. But my name is Wes Fryer, and I am here in Oklahoma City, where we have some threats of severe weather, but it's actually been quite temperate and mild. And I'm being joined, as always, by Dr. Jason Neifer, but not on Mountain Time. Joining me in Central Time, I think, down in the land of Austin, Texas. Jason, good evening. Welcome. And what is the occasion for your visit to the Lone Star State?
Good evening, Dr. Fryer. Indeed, I am joining from lovely Austin, Texas tonight, where I have been a participant in the first annual Digital Learning Annual Conference, which is a project of the Digital Learning Collaborative. In fact, I'm going to share a little information shared by the Digital Learning Collaborative today. This is the first annual conference that is the brainchild of John Watson of the Evergreen Education Group, and it is a conference aimed at distance learning, blended learning environments, and I have to say I've had an amazing time here in Austin. Not only is Austin an amazing city, I've been here 3 or 4 times now, a couple times professionally, and then I have some family in the region as well, but it was just a really awesome experience. 500 educators from across the United States and 4 other countries. A lot of Virtual Learning Leadership Alliance folks were here. I gave a couple of great presentations, had wonderful audience reaction, and I'm pretty thrilled with the conference this year. And they announced at the end today that they're already starting plans for next year's Digital Learning Annual Conference. So I'm really excited to have an opportunity to join my colleagues in distance learning, digital distance learning from really around the world.
And let me ask you a question about that before we go to
Sure.
articles and all that kind of stuff. What would you say is something that you have as an opinion or see as a trend in the arena of distance learning and blended learning that you might not have if you weren't working, as you are at a virtual academy and working so intensely with both students and teachers in the distance environment?
Sure. One of the things that I've learned a lot, and I should say that I am coming up on my 10-year anniversary working for the Montana Digital Academy, and I think I've mentioned this in past episodes of the podcast, but I was recruited to take the curriculum director's job there in 2010, January 2010, and it's actually something that initially I really turned down. I wasn't necessarily interested in leaving the classroom. The job sounded exciting. I had been part of some previous efforts in distance learning programming in the state of Montana, but I really, really like being a classroom teacher. I left the classroom, obviously willingly because it was my call, but there's not a day that goes by I don't miss teaching high school history, and it's just something that really spoke to me, and I felt like used a lot of my tool sets all at once. But I've learned a lot of things in the last 10 years. Obviously things related to being an administrator and talking to parents and students and taking on a different role than I would as a classroom teacher. But I think when it comes to distance learning, it's something that I actually spoke a little bit about this week in context of the conference, is how different the teaching events are in a distance learning environment than they are in a face-to-face environment. And something I've noticed in our program, it's also true when I talk to other state virtual schools, which is the model of the Montana Digital Academy. Is we're not a charter school, we're not a full-time school, we're a state supplemental virtual school. Other programs like ours include the Idaho Digital Learning Academy, or IDLA, the Michigan Virtual School, the North Carolina Public Virtual School. South Carolina has a program like ours. Virginia has a program like ours. And one thing I know from my colleagues there is that distance learning teaching rewards a different skill set than face-to-face teaching. And it's not unlike some of the struggles that I faced in transitioning to becoming a digital teacher. As I'm sure anyone that's heard me speak, especially live before, listened to us in the podcast, I like lecturing and I like running discussions. I like providing a lot of student-to-teacher, student-to-student interaction in the classroom. I'm a very dynamic speaker. I like putting together events, and I like the performance art of teaching, and almost none of that is rewarded in a distance learning environment. And so part of what we've really taken to heart at MTDA is helping teachers that are used to being awesome teachers because they have such an amazing presence in the classroom, and saying that you're not going to be able to really recreate that in a meaningful way in an online environment, especially if you're an asynchronous program like ours. So we work really hard to make sure communications are productive and effective. We think a lot about things like how can teachers best state instructions in order to have students engage in learning environments and not get distracted by everything that is introduced with a largely digital environment. And also, how can we empower students to take the knowledge that is part of a formal curriculum and encourage them to take the knowledge to, obviously where we need them to justify the awarding of credit, but then where can we take that further? How can we inspire students to take topics that we're interested in or they're interested in based on our courses, and then be set up for informal learning after the formal learning environment is done? And what I love about talking about my colleagues from other state virtual schools, and I've also mentioned in the past that Montana is a member of the Virtual Learning Leadership Alliance, or VLLA. And it's an organization I've served in a leadership role in. I was the curriculum director, committee chair for a number of years. And I just love talking to my colleagues from other state virtual schools because of all the really great things they're doing to work hard to make distance learning environments the best they can be to serve kids. And I have strong opinions about whether or not distance learning is quote unquote as good as face to face or not. The frank answer is that people that will state that the face to face classroom is better than the online classroom, I think, are making broad stroke assumptions that have very little to do with the reality of the day-to-day classroom and the students that we see in our online program. In a lot of cases, we're the only option for a student to take a unique elective or for a student to access formal school education while they're in a medical situation or in a personal situation. And I think that gives me personally a mission to make sure that our courses are the best they can be and utilize all the best we know about learning and the delivery of learning in a distance learning environment. So wonderful to have an opportunity to meet with my colleagues from across the United States. Wonderful conversations this week. I am utterly exhausted. It's not just because I've eaten very meaty meals as part of Texas barbecue in the last 72 hours, but also because I really taken advantage of the engagement that the DLEC conference has provided.
Awesome. Well, when you get an answer that comprehensive from one of us, you know that that has gotten to the heart of some passion and center of the wheelhouse. So that is outstanding. Well, we do want to apologize for the late start. We want to give a shout out to Peggy George, who's joining us as we're a little bit offset on our time. We are going to be talking about the week's educational technology news and technology news through an educational lens. We want to direct everyone to edtechsr.com/links, where you will find a Google Doc embedded that has a lot of links. And as I have been accustomed to, actually, Jason's just picking up the slack for me because he's built our links and I've only dropped a couple things in. But you'll see the links that we'll discuss as well as some that we will not, as well as Geeks of the Week. And those are also available on our website, edtechsr.com, where you may be listening to this asynchronously. So I think I might actually jump in with a quick security article. I know we're going to talk Google for sure because there's some real exciting Google news. But I had an opportunity we talk a lot about security on the show. And I watched a 60 Minutes episode that I had read about, I think in my Flipboard feed. I have a Twitter list of different security experts. And so oftentimes I'm finding things that way. The article is from a Canadian organization called Citizen Lab from April the 1st. So this is 2 days ago. And it's titled Dubious Denials and Scripted Spin. Spyware company NSO Group goes on 60 Minutes. And so some of the intersections to what we've talked about before, hackers and folks who want to be able to capture information for different reasons. Oftentimes that is for financial gain, but in some cases it is to, directly target individuals. And we have security agencies in the world who are operating. And so this company called the NSO Group has been in the news because when the San Bernardino shooter had an iPhone and the U.S. government, told Apple, hey, you need to, get us to get around this encryption. Apple said no. And that didn't please the government, but they found a, quote, Israeli company that was able to do that. And who that was the NSO group. Well, in more recent days, the last, few months, Jamal Khashoggi was a Saudi-born journalist that was working for the New York Times. And the allegation is that this software, which is called Pegasus, we've mentioned it before, and this is a real weaponized tool, which the company claims, and they actually go on the record with 60 Minutes in this episode, that it saved tens of thousands of lives. But the allegation by Citizen Lab is that, it's also been used by governments like Mexico and Saudi Arabia and other countries to target journalists and political opponents. And in some cases, there's been harm that's resulted. So in that video episode, in this article from Citizen Lab, I'll drop the link to the actual 60 Minutes episode. I watched it on Apple TV. If you've got the CBS News app, you can actually just watch the archived video there, or you can watch it online. It shows a phishing email, which was an example. And there's another journalist, and I'm not going to get his name exactly right, who's, I think, from the United Arab Emirates. In some cases, sending you messages saying, hey, your FedEx package, your UPS DHL package has arrived, click here to verify. And literally with one click, if you end up clicking this link, your entire iPhone is completely compromised to where they can surreptitiously turn on the microphone, turn on the camera, have access to every bit of information that you've put in there, all of your apps, everything. So you know what? Most of us are not going to be targeted by Pegasus. So I guess my question to you, Jason, is this something people should be concerned and worried about on a in a personal way, that this kind of thing is possible? How do you hear this kind of thing in terms of, hey, this capability exists and the Israelis are selling it? Is it something that gets to the personal level of personal security or organizational security, or is this just kind of something interesting we listen to and say, wow, that's happening at a nation state level, but it really doesn't affect me?
Well, I think part of the way we need to respond to this is making sure that we are diligent about asking people we buy stuff from to lock down these devices appropriately. And I got to say, I would say that Apple is really ahead of the game in comparison to other platforms when it comes to really locking things down securely. But when I hear that information about how that particular phone was compromised and how simple that process is, and I guarantee I've clicked on it. I'd be willing to bet that Wes has clicked on notifications before saying you have a package coming, click here to track. And that's just a normal course of business. And I would say that you and I are fairly careful users, right? Like I think it would be difficult, though not impossible, to do a phishing attack for us. And I hear that out loud, and I'm pretty sure I've clicked on my share of links that say exactly those types of things without batting an eye before assuming that they were safe or assuming that it had no real issue for me to do so. I do think that we need to be broadly concerned from the standpoint of we have to demand of our vendors that that when holes like this are discovered, that they are patched immediately and aggressively so that we don't face these types of threats. And part of it is that I have no doubt that really it's not an immediate threat for the vast majority of users, but if we don't demand more secure devices from vendors, then these types of vulnerabilities will become more and more and more lower level, to the point of which it could cost $1 to buy a threat like that.
I think your microphone was that in your other ear, or was the mic, something happened with your connection there?
Hi, is that better?
You're back. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's didn't even know it was coming through that mic. So, if we're not careful, right, and if we're not diligent about pushing people we buy hardware and software from to make sure that they are extremely proactive about patching these devices and they become riddled with holes, it's not going to cost what I'm assuming is an extraordinary amount from an Israeli security company to then hack a phone. It's going to be something you buy for $1 on the dark web, and it's easy. And suddenly now it's not. And I don't want to introduce too much FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt into our conversation, but you could see a tech-savvy Ute, right? So someone that's trying to bully someone else. If something becomes ubiquitous and commoditized, that they would then start buying hacks to troll their friends. And I don't think that's an immediate threat, but I think the long term is we have to be extremely careful about that.
We've mentioned it before, but one last point on this. I put in the link to the actual video on CBS News 60 Minutes. This is from March 24th. CEO of Israeli spyware maker NSO on fighting terror, Khashoggi merger, and Saudi Arabia. I'm going to put the link into a website we've mentioned before called Have I Been Pwned? If that's how you say it, or pawned. I think it's pwned, actually. And basically, you just put your email into this website. And this is something that I continue to use with our teachers as we talk about password managers and multi-factor authentication, two-step verification, and the importance of turning those kinds of things on. So really practical, I think, to recognize that the security environment is quite hostile, and we want to be careful on the things that we click on. And even though we're likely to not be the target of a tool like that, as tools are released, to Jason's point, we want to be patching our devices, running current software. And then we also want to possibly consider just doing a wipe or a clean refresh, a clean install on our mobile devices, as well as I think in our smartphones, as well as laptops, desktops. So what else would you like to talk about tonight, Dr. Neifer? You have a plethora of links to choose from.
I do. I have another security related article that's related to that. And Wes, now that I think about it, I think it'd be a great idea, since you and I like to talk about special episodes that we don't actually produce. Here's a great one. We should talk about security one night, and not from the standpoint of the kind of the doom, but you and I are both, I wouldn't say we're obsessive about it, but I think you and I are both very careful users, right? We're thoughtful about the way we implement hardware and software. We should just both nod and pretend that we are to give people hope. But I'd say both you and I, recognize that there are basic steps you can take. But I was really stunned. I don't know if that's the right word. I was taken aback by this article from ZDNet on March 25th, 2019. And there was an extensive academic study, according to Caitlin Kipino for 0 Day on ZDNet, saying that the practice of carriers and handset makers adding apps that can't be uninstalled to Android devices has become an absolute security nightmare and mess, because a lot of those apps themselves are kind of gross, because many of them are data harvesting and malware laced apps that are there for a reason, right? They're kind of there to track you, or there to sell your data, or they don't get updated very often. And I think this is a real issue in the Android architecture, the #1 phone platform on earth. Because a lot of devices just aren't getting updated beyond 2 years. And the cheaper the device, so in other words, the more mass appeal the device, the less likely it is those apps are getting updated. And I mentioned this in the past because that I utilize, this is my LG V20. It's an LG phone that was released in 2017. I like this phone a lot. It's a actually, it's a 2016 phone. I'm sorry. It's a beautiful phone. The reason why I like this particular phone is because it has a user replaceable battery, which is just not a phenomenon that you see in many, in fact, any modern phones anymore. That's the last one that had user replaceable battery was out 2 years ago. And I like to mention this, that this is the phone. This is about how thin it is when I have it regularly, and then I add this big battery pack to it, and it has a full 36 hours of battery, even with heavy use. I mention this because this phone is due to stop getting security updates in the next 6 months, even though it is a beautifully functional phone with a big bright screen and a super fast processor and a lot of RAM and storage space, and I have it exactly where I want it. I love this phone. It's really, really, really a great phone. And I'm finding that for security purposes, I may have to update to a phone that I don't really want, right? It's a little different in Apple, because Apple supports stuff a lot longer than the Android universe does. But I think what you're mentioning, Wes, about phones having security holes in them, if they're coming with pieces of pre-installed malware that are there to make the device cheaper because they're selling your data, or applications like Facebook comes pre-installed on a ton of phones now, and you can't uninstall it, even though Facebook is notorious.
Really? So like like the Internet Explorer of old, there's no escaping Facebook on some phones?
On some phones, yeah. Some phones have. I've had HTC phones with Facebook pre-installed. I have used super cheap, $25 throwaway phones. that had Facebook pre-installed that helps take down the price of the app. And there's some question whether those apps will track you even if you're not signed into an account. And so I just mention it because I like I don't want people to give up because there's nothing you can do about it, but there's a lot of ways that I think the industry is not helping us out on security and privacy. And there are a ton of indicators that we're starting to take this more seriously, but we do need to be very thoughtful about the fact that it's probably an uphill battle and probably a battle worth waging.
Awesome. All right. Let's talk a little bit of Google. Let's see. I think I dropped one Google article in. This is Lifehacker on March 27th. Google's canned responses feature is finally good. I actually set this up. So this has been something in a Google Lab, I think, that you had to enable, but now it's just built in. And a canned response is just something that you're going to have to send a lot. So I'm thinking maybe use some other keyboard shortcut tools or something to do that. I know some people really swear by, certain utilities that'll help with that. But I'm finding myself, I certainly was last week. We had just kind of a terrible week for cyber attack and fraud and, just kind of some crazy stuff, targeted stuff that wasn't just like, hey, I'm in Nigeria, send me money. Anyway, I ended up, replying with the same kind of blurb to many faculty and staff, which is saying, thank you for letting me know. Please make sure you report this as phishing. I've actually found it nice. There's some animated GIFs that you can get that'll embed right into your email that show you the steps of doing that. So anyway, I use that, and I'm glad to see that is now not just an add-on, but there were some other exciting announcements from Google. Do you want to take us down any of those, Jason?
Sure. Well, first, I'd like to wish a hearty happy birthday to Gmail, which turned 15 on Monday, April 1st. And it makes me a little wispy because I was a Gmail user from the first moment it was available to me. For those of you that are old school Google users, you probably remember that Gmail was not universally available. It was in beta for several years, and they rolled it out very slowly. You had to have an invite to Gmail. And then once you used it for a couple of weeks, you were given 5 invites to share with friends. And so a shout out to an old friend of mine, Greg Fisher, who I think at that point was working for Intel, who gave me my Gmail invite, and I never looked back. I've had the same Gmail address for actually probably goes back 15 years this or next month. And it's been just an amazing journey because I think Gmail reinvented email, right? The notion that you were searching instead of sorting, which was a big feature in the early Gmail days. The fact that they offered initially unlimited storage, well, actually it was limited storage, but it kept going up over time. They had a counter that said the amount of storage they offered available to you. Now it's a large amount of storage. I think they wrap that into 15 gigs, which for most people, it will store decades and decades of email. I will say for the record, because it's funny to mention this, I am now using a terabyte of space at work for archived emails. It's that much email over at the State Virtual School in Montana. But the thing I wanted to mention about that is that in a lot of ways, the platform reinvented email became the mark for other platforms. So you see elements of Gmail's design in Yahoo Mail. You see elements of Gmail's design in the modern Outlook. In fact, I use a couple of Microsoft email boxes now for some other work I do outside my day job, including the work I do with NCCE. And Outlook email, Outlook 365 email is infinitely more functional than it was just a few years back, and they borrow a lot from that design precept. So happy birthday, Gmail. We love you. The world is better because you were born. So that said, there was a few other features released this week, and Wes mentioned one of them, that they have expanded out and reconfigured the canned responses, which is a wonderful strategy, by the way, if you are a teacher or an administrator that answers a lot of similar emails during the day. Dr. Fryer is correct. I use text expansion for this. I've moved a little bit beyond the canned responses, but I also pay for a service that's a premier there. If I didn't, canned responses would be great. And I'll give you an example of this. Because I answer so much email, I oftentimes, repeat the same things over and over again. And those things I repeat are oftentimes the niceties that come with email. And so if I type in .tn with my text expander, it puts in all the phrases that I would use to respond to a support ticket. which are common, about 15 or 20 of them. If I type in .pn, it's .parent nice. It's the types of things I would want to add to a parent email so that they know that they are heard and that beyond the specific parts of their concerns, I want to let them know that I've been thinking about their pieces. And the same with students as well. But canned responses are great. The other new feature that's being rolled out this week is the much requested feature that relates to Smart Compose. And between Smart Compose and email scheduling, they're starting to add a lot of AI to email. And now Smart Scheduling is actually an enhancement that they've released an earlier version of a couple of months back. It basically tries to use AI to determine if it looks like if the context of your email is something you should follow up on, right? Like if you emailed someone and it sounded like you were looking for a response, it will kick the email back up to you after a couple of days and say, did you want to follow up on this? I have this turned on at work and it's pretty great. Smart Compose allows you to send an email on a later date. So compose an email and say, send this at 7:45 Monday morning. This is particularly great for folks that like to work late and don't want to send a bunch of kind of awkward emails in the middle of the night and obligate people to feel like they need to answer your emails. I used to be more of a late night person when I first started my current job 9 years ago. I'm not as much anymore, but I used another third-party service called Boomerang for this. But if I were up in the middle of the night and shooting out a bunch of emails, I did feel bad about that because I didn't want people to feel like they needed to be up at 2:30 in the morning to grab, whatever, brilliant thing I'm rambling on and at 2:30 in the morning in email. I would just have them show up at 8:01 on the next morning. So that's a great feature. And then you can also kind of snooze something. You could say, I don't want to deal with this email right now. You click on a button and it will come back when you tell it to. So if it's a webinar you may want to attend on August 19th, you could say at 3 p.m., you could say at 2:30 on August 19th, return this email to me so that if my day allows for it, I could jump in on a webinar. So great features, and I'm glad to see that they're pretty regularly releasing more and more great features for Gmail, and it's got that same spirit as the Gmail of 2004.
Absolutely. I did a little research too on the basically Boomerang, which has been a paid subscription feature as of April 15th. That will be available to, it sounds like, all G Suite and Gmail users, and there's not any intervention required on the part of the G Suite administrator in your organization, which is me today. So that is great news. And I know we've got lots of folks excited about that. And it is important to recognize from a wellness standpoint, because not that everybody is sitting there. In fact, sometimes it's unfortunate because I receive emails sometimes from people who do think I'm, just sitting with my phone right here with bated breath 24 hours a day, waiting to listen to it or waiting to, receive it and reply. And sometimes I'm able to, but anyway, that is a good thing. And it's a good thing from a wellness standpoint as well. Let's see. I'm trying to see if there's anything else on the Google side.
Yeah, there's one other thing I want to mention. I shout out to Simon Miller, the tech director in Kellogg, Idaho, or as he likes to call it, fabulous upstate Idaho. Shout out to Simon, great, good friend, great tech director, great Google buddy out there. And he posted a conversation the other day talking about the kind of death of Google products. And in the last couple of weeks, Google has either announced or put shutdown dates on a couple of wonderful tools that just didn't take off or did take off and Google's decided to go in another direction. And among those, Google Plus is now officially dead. This has been a long time coming. We talked about it in the past in the podcast. Google Inbox, which was a kind of an advanced Google layover to Gmail that had a lot of kind of management features that allowed you to kind of see email differently. Many of those features have been rolled into core Gmail. So the Inbox product in some ways had been, I guess for lack of a better term, made irrelevant with the new stuff. So Inbox wasn't as necessary. But there is some debate about whether or not Google's insistence to kill things that they don't feel like have a strategic future with them is actually hurting the product. And there's a great article from Ars Technica, Ron Amartyo at Ars Technica from yesterday's edition, talks about how the brand is damaged by this kind of constant product shutdown where Google decides to go in another direction. We've recently reported on the podcast as an example that Google has kind of minimized its staffing in its hardware department. And so there's some suspicion and there's some disagreement about what this means because there's been no really official announcements here. But the folks that are making the Pixelbook, the Pixel phones, those departments are apparently not as many as they were, just a few months back, and they're starting to kind of scale down those departments a little bit. And the Amartyo article would argue that that's hurting Google's brand ultimately because there's just no product you can really rely on because it seems like many of even popular products go away. And I'm gonna go ahead and guess, and Wes, I'd like to hear your thoughts about this because I know this impacted you, but probably the most famous one for the kind of tech-savvy nerd set that I knew was the getting rid of Google Reader several years back. The RSS reader, which I think, to be quite frank, would still be a very relevant product in 2019. And for better or for worse, I've changed the way that I interact with information because of the lack of Google Reader, even though there are RSS reader alternatives available. But that's a product that people still talk about because people just don't understand why that product had to go away. And I'm guessing you, sir, are also missing that product.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think of what I have as a replacement because I don't open it that often, right? I use basically Flipboard instead. And Feedly is the one. And I imported all my feeds from Google Reader in there, grandfathered in as far as not having to pay, et cetera. But yeah, it's a sad thing. Now, a couple clarifications on the Google Plus. If your community was created inside a G Suite domain for education, it can live on. So we've got one that we call Cassidy Learning for our school. And so that one's not going to go away. I do need to check in with the Giuseppe admins, Google Plus account. That's the Google, G Suite for Education users group for admins. Fantastic podcast. I haven't listened to that in a little while. I think that they had over 5,000 users, and it was just a great place to be able to post a question. Scott Summer, shout out to him in our chat room, points out that if you're on the rapid release for new G Suite features, then you might see like the schedule email sooner. I think I saw that it was April 15th that just regular G Suite folks were going to see that. And then on a comment about links, Peggy's dropped a good link, which I'll put into the show notes, from VentureBeat, which was Google's April Fool's Day 2019 jokes. I was amazed they announced legitimate products on April Fool's Day, right? Because usually that's when they announce, Google, what was it? Google for animals. What was that? When it was interpret the animals, the pigs and the ducks talking.
Announced Gmail on April Fool's Day.
That's weird. And maybe
introduced Drive on that day as well.
That's weird. Well, yeah, maybe that was why, since it was the birthday, I guess they were announcing new ones. Anyway, our live chat, which if you end up joining us live at any time, you can feel free to chime in. Before you had to designate somebody a moderator. Now, like Scott dropped in a link and it just popped up show or hide, and I was able to just click show, and there it is. It popped up there. So anyway, I guess we're going to have to accept the good with the bad. I mean, Google is giving us a lot of free things. Of course, they're monetizing our data and we're sacrificing privacy. But as we've talked about on the show, it also feels like Google has been a lot more forthright and less deceptive and duplicitous and whatever you want to say about, the ways in which they are utilizing our information and giving us choices about using that. And of course, to be clear, with G Suite for Education, they are not monetizing data from students, and they're very, diligent about the ways in which information from minors is protected, et cetera. But I know you put in as a breaking news, I think, article at the top, this Washington Post on March 30th, Mark Zuckerberg, the internet needs new rules. Let's start in these 4 areas. Did Zuck succeed in winning your heart and your mind, Jason? And are you now ready to just recognize that he said, I'm sorry, for the 300th time, and we can believe him this time because he's really sincere and he's a good guy, and Facebook's going to be all about privacy now. Is that where we're at?
Well, maybe after reading this, I could have been convinced, but then, of course, today there was an announcement that apparently Google had left a bunch of unsecured data on some Amazon cloud servers. That
Amazon or Google did, or Facebook?
I'm sorry, Facebook left some. Yeah, that was weird. Facebook left some data on some unsecured Amazon cloud servers that was apparently accessed by nefarious third parties. So, it's a kind of a mixed bag, and especially since that part of what I've always kind of found interesting about the Zuckerberg myth is that, or maybe Zuckerberg myth and legend is that, they took security seriously, right? Maybe not privacy, but security was something they were super serious about, hired the best security folks on earth, and to find out that they left a bunch of data on AWS servers that was basically left there out in the open was not good. But, I encourage you to read the article from Zuckerberg in the Washington Post. The Amazon owned Washington Post, right? I think it's worth having some conversations about this. He talks about the need for a global framework for privacy and security and data protection. He talks about the need for protecting elections through legislation. He talks about the need to regulate the internet. And of course, this is an extremely smart move, savvy move on the part of Mr. Zuckerberg and the Facebook crowd, because, this is coming, right? And if Silicon Valley can nudge this in the right direction, we might be able to get things that don't just straight up break the things we like about social networking and the internet. And of course, there's been a number of interpretive articles. There was one from yesterday's Verge that talks a little bit about this, and Casey Newton argues that that if Facebook can get ahead of this from a regulatory standpoint, it actually gives them a competitive advantage, because if they can spell out some of the terms of regulation that do effectively protect privacy while at the same time allowing Facebook to continue to be competitive in that field, they would scare off other competitors from coming into the space. I'm not convinced yet that we don't need to do more in the space. I'm just not entirely sure what more we can do that would be meaningful without crafty legislation, right? Like my biggest fear here, and I think we've talked about this in the past in the podcast, is that if we do this wrong, we're going to break everything that's great about the internet, right?
Oh, Europe's already on the road for that, so that's might be even happening no matter what we do.
Well, yeah, true. And, and the other thing that is also a little bit terrifying is that, and I think this is particularly true about EdTech, is that there's a lot of movement around privacy laws. Montana is debating right now an implementation of SOPIPA, which I'm not sure if you've heard of SOPIPA before, but that's a California-based law that was enacted a couple of years ago, and it adds in specific penalties and the ability to sue, I think, companies that sell student data, and I think we do need to regulate, and we do need to legislate based on this, but I don't know what the answer is to make sure that that legislation allows enough freedom to continue to innovate in this space and understand that when things work together, when tools work together, they are better than when they are in separate silos. And
let me offer a starting point is electing officials at both a local and a federal level who are tech savvy, right? Absolutely. Because the day of like, I don't understand, I'm not a user, I don't know. I mean, some of those questions that you hear legislators in Washington, asking, and obviously some of it's grandstanding, but, Sundar Pichai got asked some really silly questions that just, demonstrated how little, not only the legislator, but also I would assume their, staff.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe that was just themselves on their own. But we do need folks that are tech savvy to be in place. And of course, we need to be cautious. But overall, I think we do need an adjustment in terms of our view of regulation and how it's important not to let the market run unfettered.
Right.
Take a look at how many trees are in Haiti to see if, colonialism really worked out well for them when we just,
Right.
took the gloves off and said, yeah, do whatever you want, guys. Obviously it's different context, but in general, I think regulation has a very important role to play in making sure that folks stay within the boundaries of the guardrails. And we're not going to, probably go off on this right now, but I think it's Elizabeth Warren, right, who's proposed these things about breaking up companies and things. And I think that's definitely an outlier kind of proposal and probably not thought through. Well, I don't know. I'm sure it's been thought through a lot to be able to be a presidential candidate and put something forward like that. But it's going to be interesting to see the conversations that we have around regulation. And, it's multi-sided, right? It's not just that the companies don't want to respond. It's also that they are having an incredibly difficult time responding, not just on the privacy side, but when we talk about, the ways in which information and social media is being weaponized. It's pretty eye-opening to see how challenging and maybe even intractable some of these issues and challenges are if you allow for things like, hey, anybody can live stream at any time. Hey, anybody who wants to can upload even with a bot as many videos that they want, etc.
Right. Well, and you mentioned the legislators not getting it when they were first calling Zuck into Capitol Hill to kind of answer for the Cambridge Analytica stuff. But some of those questions that they were asking Mr. Zuckerberg were just showed that they don't have a lot of savvy there, right? Like when the famous one was Mr. Zuckerberg, Senator, Mr. Zuckerberg, how does Facebook make money? And there was this weird silence because, it's that one should be obvious. And he said, Senator, we advertise, right? Because we collect ad revenue because that's how the modern internet runs, as it turns out. And, and that's part of what complicates EdTech too, right? Like the free stuff that teachers love free stuff. Just go to a conference and see them stealing pens and stickers and stress balls from vendors, right? Taking home bags of them because teachers love free stuff. And the internet has been built off this model of free, but free has to come from somewhere, right? Free has to be paid for somehow, and advertising does that. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that's how these networks have developed. And so I agree, Wes. Tech savvy legislators is really a key part of making sure that we regulate appropriately without kind of killing the infrastructure that we've built to this point.
Well, we are approaching the top of the hour. We got started a little bit later, so we will go a little bit after the top of the hour, if that's all right with you, Jason. What would be? Oh, I'll throw this one out. This is from I hadn't heard of this website before, which of course this is part of media literacy, right? Where is this coming from? Is there a link in this, social media tweet, whatever? It was referred to, actually, there's a newsletter because I'm a registered drone owner. Not that I have actually used our inherited drone at school, but this website is called Foxtrot Alpha. And the headline is, Russia's shotgun-wielding drone is the flying nightmare you didn't know you had. And this was from March 29th, 2019. So yes, they have a YouTube video of it, and it basically has a shotgun that has been mounted onto a fixed-wing drone aircraft, and I forget how many it says that 12 gauge shotgun barrel, magazine of 10 shells, and so the company has a slogan. What was the slogan? It's something about like if it flies, it dies. I think that's what it is actually. So yeah. The unnamed drone seems to continue the company's if it flies, it dies theme. Instead of a regular aerodynamically shaped nose, like pretty much every other drone, it has a 12 gauge shotgun barrel. So, Jason, not to conflate you with some, Montana extremists, but I know the Unabomber at one time called your state home. Do you think we'll be seeing any of these flying around the United States? And perhaps maybe this is why there have been discussions about drone regulation, and everyone who is a drone owner is supposed to register with the FAA.
I do not expect this to be a real dominant part of the model, right? Because I think the crackdown that would come afterwards would be pretty extraordinary. But in the same way that futuristic views that people will sometimes purport for the future have a lot of drones flying around, right? Remember, Amazon, UPS, FedEx are all experimenting with this notion of a truck that gets parked in your neighborhood in the morning and a drone that does all the individual deliveries all day long to your doorstep, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all part of what could be happening, coming to a doorstep near you in the relatively near future. But, it's just part of, I don't see that being really as any different than mounting a rifle on a car or truck, other than the driver may be literally a world away. That's a little dystopian to me, but I mean it does. I think it does highlight how I know there was a lot of hand wringing after the movement to regulate drones because of the kind of bad acting that had happened with crowds, with interfering with law enforcement and with emergency services. During things like fires, there have been a couple of drones that have done some naughty things with major international airports, in some cases shutting down airports for hours at a time as a drone got in the way of air traffic. I think it's part of the natural evolution of when these new technologies become available. We have to, regulate to make sure that they are used appropriately and aim our actions at bad actors.
A couple more quick hits for articles before we do Geeks of the Week.
Sure. A couple quick Microsoft ones. If you are a Microsoft Windows 10 user and you have automatic updates set up, you should act now, according to ZDNet, to make sure that the spring update is delayed if you do not want it, if you're a production machine. And this is especially true if you're a home user. There are lots of tweaks that network users can do to stop or delay Windows from updating to the latest big version number if you are a Windows 10 administrator. But if you're a personal user, they are really scaling back the number of folks that are going to initially roll out the new version of Windows 10.2. And in fact, I think for the first several weeks, you have to go and actually download the update. It's not even automatic. You have to take an action yourself to do that. I know I will do that personally because I do end up taking those updates because my Windows machine is really not my main machine. I'm mostly on a Chromebook as a rule of thumb, so I will take that update. But if you are a personal user, especially if you ran into the issues with the update in October 2018, I'd strongly suggest that you stop that from updating. I believe you can delay it for many weeks after its availability. And
I think it's 30 days. That
30 days.
I mean, we use deep freeze, and so we can just freeze our machines. But I think 30 days is what it has been, unless they've changed it. So
yeah, definitely consider doing that. And then one other interesting note, we had mentioned previously on the podcast that Microsoft Edge is moving towards the Chromium base, the open source Chromium base. And there's been a lot of interesting articles amongst the Uber nerds in the last 2 or 3 weeks about early betas of the Chromium-based version. And there's a great article that talks about some of the early features. Petri on March 26th talks a little bit about enterprise features that will appear in Edge that are not part of the current Edge code base that is Microsoft created as opposed to Chromium-based created. Probably the most interesting thing for me personally is that and again, I'm a minority Windows user, right? It's a part of my workflow, not the predominant platform I'm on. But one of the things that always was a little hard about Edge is that I love having multiple profiles in a browser. It's why I love Chrome so much, because I can have a work profile and a home profile and a NCCE profile, and all my projects can have their own Chrome profile, so I can have my browser set up the way I want it to, sign into the sites I want to be signed into for my various projects. And they're bringing that to, or it appears to be bringing that to, the Edge browser. So you can be in the Edge browser and say, this is my personal Microsoft account. Now I can go to a different version of the browser that is my work Microsoft account. And for those of you steeped in the Microsoft universe, that's something that I think Chrome has really been kicking Edge's pants on, because the frank answer is that you need a work browser, I think, and you need a home browser. There are different ways you might want to set that up, different plugins you might want to use. So I'm very encouraged by that.
And my last little quick article is about the hydrogen economy. I had a chance to visit our son this last weekend and on Monday out in Colorado, where he's a junior at the Colorado School of Mines. And in fact, he gave me one of my Geeks of the Week tonight. But one of his roommates is a chemistry major, and he's doing some research as an intern this summer on storing hydrogen and empowering the hydrogen economy. So I kind of had my eyes or ears perk up a little bit of this Forbes article from April 2nd. Get ready for 1.5 cent renewable energy, Stephen Chu says, which could unleash the hydrogen economy. And there has been some articles I've just seen recently about, worldwide, the percentage of energy that's now produced by renewables. And amidst the more dystopian and negative things that we might be sharing and talking about here when it comes to security and hacks and those sorts of things, here's a very positive article about renewable energy in that future. And if you don't know, Stephen Chu, he was the former Secretary of Energy for the United States. He was a 1997 Nobel Prize winner in physics. He's the new president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. So anyway, I will look forward to that. I think hydrogen is a little bit dangerous, but hopefully they will figure out how to work that out. I'm sure that Alexander's roommate is going to get that all solved this summer in Golden, Colorado for us. So any Geeks of the Week this week for you, Jason?
Yeah, I'll just share a quick one. I thought I mentioned this before, and then I looked at our past show notes. I don't think I have. Google has and I'm going to put this in quotation marks, a free VPN solution that is actually not aimed at end users like us, but rather at journalists trying to tunnel it securely into like a home base to send articles and things that may be sniffed out by nefarious actors. But the VPN is called Outline, and Outline is an open source piece of software that you can download on Windows, Mac, or Linux machine, and then utilize a cloud-based service. So I use DigitalOcean, which is a popular cloud provider, and I pay $5 a month for a terabyte of transfer. And for those of you that have not heard us talk about how amazing VPNs are, what VPN essentially does is takes all your internet traffic, no matter where you're located, and it puts a kind of a barrier around it so that it can't be sniffed out. So right now, if you go to public Wi-Fi, a lot of that is protected because of SSL certificates and SSL security. So it's not like your data is out in the open, but plenty of data can be sniffed out in open internet connections if things that are maybe not like your credit card numbers, but other things that are otherwise useful pieces of information for tracking you. What a VPN does is essentially says, for someone that's monitoring your internet, which could include your ISP, it could include your employer, it could include anyone who may be controlling your internet connection. It simply says, instead of showing you where you're going or where you're accessing, instead just says you're accessing the VPN. Right, it just shows that IP address for all the traffic, and so it's easy to set up. I again am a little bit nerdy, so it was a familiar piece to me, but I have a couple VPN services that I use. But Outline VPN is a pretty easy $5 a month solution that requires just a little bit of tech savvy to get going. And I will say it's also the VPN solution that we're going to be using for our teachers that have to use public Wi-Fi. We're going to create a couple or actually we're going to create one master Outline VPN account and then share that with a handful of teachers that we know have to use public Wi-Fi as a component of their grading. And we want to secure that student data when they're online and accessing resources through my work. So getoutline.org is the website, and it's fun to set up and an interesting tool to use.
Awesome. And shout out to Scott Summer, who in the chat room says that Cloudflare just released a free VPN service, and I will drop a link of that into the show notes. I will go fast because I'm overdoing it, as I often do with my Geeks of the Week. I got 4. Alan Levine, Cogdog, follow him on Twitter. What are you doing? What you been doing with your time? He has a new, I don't know actually how new it is, but it is to me, he used to daily create basically, and they had a daily create for DS 106. Am I getting that right? Anyway, the digital storytelling class that he was helping with for years. This is called the Daily Digital Alchemy, 1 creative spell per day. And so there's a challenge. You could submit it and you tweet it with a hashtag, and you can see what everybody else is doing. And there's leaderboards and all this incredibly awesome, cool stuff. So yeah, again, that's like one of the most positive links I will share in our show today. Second thing, when I was walking around at Colorado School of Mines, having our son give me a little tour on Monday morning, I saw some really excellent posters, and turns out these are free. And so they're from SANS, and I've got the link there to free security awareness posters. And you can print these, print them in color, put them up in your organization, share them on digital signage. One of the ones that I saw there talked about you being the target and just how important it is to secure the human, right? The human being is oftentimes the weak link when it comes to security issues. And whether or not you are an IT director, I mean, it doesn't matter. All of us can have a responsibility and play a role in helping educate those around us in our family, our friends, those with which we have contact. And so, security is important. The best video, oh my gosh, I've seen in months is this one. It's called Manipulating the YouTube Algorithm. It's part 1 of 3 of Smarter Every Day. And that's the YouTube channel that Destin runs. This is incredible stuff. I'm going to be doing a workshop in 2 weeks called Filtering the Exaflood Strategies for Information and Media Literacy. And I'm probably going to use either this video or another one by Dustin, I think, that really just, he has interviewed folks at YouTube and Facebook, talks about math and how they're trying to solve these really challenging things. Like, how do we prevent a terrorist shooter in New Zealand from having thousands of copies of videos uploaded. And obviously that was not the person who was uploading those thousands of videos, but it's just so challenging in the ways in which both Twitter and Facebook, along with YouTube, are being weaponized, and they drive mainstream media, and really the almost intractability of these issues. Fantastic. And if you, by the way, know of any other videos similar to this, talking about the digital literacy skills, point me in that direction. He talks about, I think, the Pointer Institute. I'll share in next week's show. I'll have an updated Google Doc with resources. But anyway, I'm excited about that Atlas workshop, and I think it's really critical that we look at media literacy and filtering strategies, and the ways in which we take responsibility for the things that we both consume and choose to believe, and then also the things that we choose to share. And then lastly, because of Smarter Every Day, and I don't know if you have this experience, but before I follow someone, I take a look at their feed. And for instance, if there's profanity or whatever, I mean, sometimes you'll be judged by the company you keep. So, there are things that are red flags for me that I usually don't follow. But anyway, I'll check things out. Sometimes I'll retweet or like things. That's how I found this post. Andreas Gall currently works for Apple. He's not writing as an Apple employee, but his Medium post is called "No One Should Have to Travel in Fear." And he has filed a lawsuit with the help of the EFF because of what Homeland Security did and stopping him, trying to force him to open up his laptop and his iPhone and give them access. And he had never had any trouble before. They actually took away his global access, status during this process. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with that court case. But we have talked on the show before about travel, about what you might want to have or not have on your smartphone, the importance of, having encryption available, and perhaps, thinking carefully, maybe you want to travel with a Chromebook. Maybe you want to, if you have your device wiped, obviously that may be a flag for somebody. Maybe you want to travel with, I'm not saying a burner phone, and I'm not saying we have to be paranoid, but I am saying that if your stuff, gets, let's say your smartphone data all gets sucked into, not just the United States, but any customs, or Homeland Security organization in whatever country you happen to travel to, all that information is then, hackable by somebody. And these are things to consider. So that is way too much for a Geek of the Week. But you know what? We don't get paid any more or any less for sharing more or less Geeks of the Week. So Jason, what is this thing here, and where can people find you if they would like to, drink from the font of digital knowledge that you are frequently sharing?
Well, this whole thing here is the EdTech Situation Room, and we are a podcast once a week, usually at 8 p.m. Mountain, 9 p.m. Central, 300, 400, 34 UTC, where we talk about links every week and news that's in the tech world, and talk about through an educational lens. But me personally, I'm on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach. I work with the Northwest Council for Computer Education, blog.ncc.org. I'm also the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the fabulous University of Montana campus. And actually, we're about ready to move in brand new offices as part of a building expansion at the Phyllis J. Washington College of Education and Human Sciences. I'm looking forward to showing off that beautiful space once we move down there in a couple of weeks. We are at montanadigitalacademy.org, or if you want to follow us on Twitter, which is mostly just announcements from me about technical issues or opening, closing of semesters and enrollment. MontDigicad is our Twitter feed there. Wes, what about you?
I am W. Fryer on Twitter. Speedofcreativity.org is my blog. And as I mentioned, here in a couple of weeks, I'm very excited to get to go to the Atlas Conference, which is an educational technology and technology leaders in independent schools conference that is down in Dallas, Texas. And I will be, I'm sure, tweeting a lot from that conference. And I probably will be sharing a few blog posts, although generally I share my learning from conferences now on Twitter, and then sometimes we'll create a Twitter moment. I don't know if you've made one of those, but it's like Storify, but it's built into Twitter. And so you can archive a bunch of tweets. And anyway, that's where I am sharing. So we want to thank both Scott and Peggy for joining us live. We want to thank you for tuning in. Please let us know if you listen to the show. You can always reach out to our show Twitter channel at EdTechSR and follow us there. That's where we will tweet a live show link if we're able to. It used to auto tweet, and actually YouTube changed that API setting with Twitter integration, so we have to manually do that. But as I think Peggy and Scott did, you can go to our Twitter channel. You can find all the great links at edtechsr.com to include our show notes, and we want to encourage you to stay savvy and stay safe. Have a great week, everybody, and we hope that the spring is going to be safe and tornado-free for you. We are crossing our fingers here in Central Oklahoma about that.